The special counsel in the Russia investigation is just weeks away from questioning President Trump. Robert Mueller spoke last week with Attorney General Jeff Sessions, the first cabinet member to be interviewed.
But the president says he's not worried about that conversation. CBS News also confirms Mueller has interviewed former FBI Director James Comey.
Callum Borchers is a politics and media reporter for The Fix at The Washington Post. He joins us now from Washington. So, Callum, in the next few weeks, it seems the president is expected to face questioning by special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. What will be the focus of that interview, do you think?
Well, we're reporting today that Robert Mueller is particularly interested in learning more about conversations with James Comey and about Michael Flynn. So what's interesting about that is that the focus right now seems to be less about Russia and meddling in the election and perhaps more about obstruction of justice. So recall that James Comey testified earlier this year that the president, in his view, had essentially directed him to drop the FBI's probe of Michael Flynn, the former national security advisor. Comey also claimed that he had been asked for a loyalty pledge by the president. Trump disputes that version of events. And I think what's going to be interesting is to see over the next few weeks the level of willingness to engage we see from the White House and the president, because that's been a moving target for the last 6 months or so.
Callum, the president, as well as some congressional Republicans, are pointing to the potential political bias of two FBI employees involved in the Mueller investigation. How could this impact the credibility of Robert Mueller's findings?
Well, it's a great question because you sort of see parallel universes in a lot of ways. I mean, if you tune into the Fox News channel, you will come away with the conclusion that this investigation has zero credibility, that it has been a witch hunt, a politically motivated witch hunt from the start, and that we're not talking about a couple of outliers here. We're talking about widespread bias across the board. I think in other circles you see the FBI kind of under attack and a strong belief that the investigation has a lot of credibility and that perhaps there was one FBI agent and an attorney who were rightfully removed from the probe, but that the whole thing is not tainted. And so what will be interesting is to see just sort of how in polling the general public views the investigation. Right now you see folks saying that they do think that it is important still.
Callum, you mentioned that depending on which cable channel you watch, you may get a completely different impression of the FBI. And according to your recent article and some other reporting from other Washington Post reporters, it appears as if the president's advisors are well aware of this as well, and they appear to be talking to him through the television. We have often seen surrogates talking on cable channels and wonder whether or not they're talking to an audience of one. But you write about something more specific about the White House sort of stacking the cable channels to make sure that the president sees exactly what he wants to.
Yeah, this is something that you can sort of detect if you watch cable news with some frequency. It sometimes appears as though his advisors, whether formal or informal, are talking to him. Occasionally, you'll turn into Fox News and you'll see someone actually turn to the camera and address the president directly. So in those cases, it's rather explicit. But I thought that one of the most striking details in the sort of behind-the-scenes report over the weekend from our Ashley Parker and Josh Dawsey was about this strategy that the White House had during the government shutdown. They were concerned that the president, who is a deal maker by nature, might be discouraged if he saw too much negative commentary on cable news, laying blame for the shutdown at his feet, and that perhaps just to put an end to it, he might make a bad deal, that he might be inclined to make too many concessions to Chuck Schumer, just in the interest of drawing this thing to a close. And so part of the strategy was to stock the airwaves with supportive voices who the president would be watching and who would kind of soothe his impulses and help him to be patient. Ultimately, it appears to have paid off, right? Because on Monday, the Republicans really yielded very little. You got a vague promise from Mitch McConnell to have kind of a good faith negotiation in the next few weeks about DACA. But you'd have to say that it was really Democrats who yielded on this one.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and so to that point,
the president would certainly say that.
Yeah, he certainly would. He's been saying that. He tweeted that the Democrats caved. After all that happened, the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer has now decided to withdraw an offer to fund the border wall, that big campaign promise that President Trump made before he was elected. He said, quote, "If there's no wall, there is no DACA." So what role will the president play in these ongoing negotiations if he's gloating on Twitter that the Democrats are losers?
Well, he's going to play an important role because what Republicans in Congress need is kind of a target, right? I mean, there's the frustrating thing, I think, for them, expressed by Lindsey Graham, who recently said it's like negotiating with Jell-O, is they don't necessarily know what kind of bill the president will sign. So they can go into this negotiation with Democrats, and they may come up with what they think is a good deal, as we saw last week when Graham and Dick Durbin seemed to have what they thought was going to be an acceptable bipartisan solution based on the president's earlier claim in that memorable televised negotiating session when he said that he would basically sign whatever they gave him and he'd be willing to take the heat. The president ended up rejecting that. And so I think that that's where Republicans are right now. They want some clarity from the White House. What do you want from us, so that at least we don't waste our time producing a deal that you're ultimately going to veto?
Yeah, indeed. And, I thought it was very curious, his tweet right now. I know Sarah Huckabee Sanders talked about the president's strategy over the weekend clearly had worked, and part of his strategy was that he didn't tweet about any of this stuff over the weekend. And these shutdowns, as we learned yesterday, Vlad, from Major Garrett, it's all about leverage. And if the Democrats feel like their base doesn't think they hung on long enough, who knows what's going to happen on February 8th, right?
Exactly right. Exactly right. Callum Borchers, always great to talk to you, my friend. Appreciate it.
Glad to be